Hey, hope your internet's going well. Let's talk about Risk of Rain Returns. Risk of Rain Returns is an updated release of the 2013 roguelite classic, Risk of Rain. Now, I'm sure most people by now are familiar with, or have at least heard of this game's popular sequel, Risk of Rain 2, but a lot of people, myself included, have never experienced the original. Risk of Rain 2 is one of my favorite games from the last few years thanks to its incredibly fun gameplay and tremendous replay value. I've always wanted to go back and check out the original, but just never got around to it. Now, thanks to this updated version, I've been able to do just that, and I'd like to tell you about it today. We'll start with the story first, because there's not a whole lot, at least on the surface. The game opens with an incredibly well animated cutscene that will probably confuse you the first time you see it, but will eventually make sense the further you progress. In the cutscene, a ship called the UES Contact Light crashes on an unknown planet. This is caused by the game's main villain, Providence. You, as a survivor of the wreck, must now venture through this planet and kill Providence in order to escape. The story goes way deeper than that, but that's the basic summary of it. The way that you uncover more of the story is through finding log entries which will tell you more about the world and its many characters. This isn't necessary to enjoy the game at all though, you can completely ignore it if you want and just focus on the gameplay. Although I will say the story is actually more interesting than you'd expect, so I'd recommend checking out at least the first couple logs you find. Alright, let's talk about the presentation. Real quick, I'll mention the PC port. It's great. It runs well and I didn't experience any bugs or crashes. I will say the hard 60 FPS limit is a bit disappointing, but it's not a big deal. Risk of Rain Returns is a beautiful game, both visually and sonically. The whole game is 2D and goes for a classic, pixelated art style with some modern elements. There's a bunch of different environments to explore, and they all look drastically different to one another. You always start in this more basic looking area, but then you'll quickly discover new locations ranging from underground magma caverns to snowy cliffs and many more. The enemies and characters also look great. There's a bunch of different ones that all fit in very well with the area they're found in, and they all have excellent animations. It's some of the best sprite work I've seen before. Now let's talk about the sound. The sound design in Risk of Rain Returns is equally impressive as the visuals. And that's important because you often have to rely more on your ears than your eyes in this game. In the later stages, the screen is just filled with enemies, and it can be hard to tell what's going on, so instead, you can listen for specific enemy attacks to help you avoid taking damage. Even just interacting with the world sounds good. The sound you get whenever you open a chest is super satisfying, and I don't know why, but I really like the sound effect you get whenever you fall from a high place. And then there's the music. My god, the music. Every stage has its own theme, and they are all an absolute treat to listen to. The goal of the music is to give you a sense of mystery and exploration as you progress through each stage, and it absolutely accomplishes that. It actually reminds me a lot of the music from some of the Metroid games. The music can also shift on a dime whenever the action heats up, like when you start a boss fight, and let me tell you, it's good stuff. And hey, speaking of boss fights, let's get to the gameplay. Risk of Rain's gameplay is quite basic when you first start, but gets more and more complex the further you get into it. You start by selecting the character that you want to play as, followed by choosing your difficulty and any artifacts you want to use. You'll then spawn in on the first level, where your goal is to kill enemies in order to collect money required to open these chests and other things to get loot. After you're satisfied with the loot you've collected, it's now time to find this thing called the teleporter. Activate it, kill the boss, and survive for 90 seconds until you take this teleporter to the next level, and do it all again. Now Risk of Rain is a roguelite, which means that when you die, you lose most of your progress and need to start from the beginning. Notice how I said roguelite, and not roguelike. A roguelike is when death means a full restart with zero progress carried over. A roguelite is when death still results in a restart, but you do carry over some form of progression from your previous run. In Risk of Rain Returns, you are pretty much constantly unlocking new stuff throughout your run, like new items, characters, and artifacts. All of this stuff carries over after you die, and will be available for you to use and find in all future runs. Items and characters are pretty self-explanatory. Items are things that you acquire from opening chests, completing challenges, and killing bosses that simply add skills to your character in order to make them stronger. There is so many of these items to find that I won't even try to explain all of them, but some of the highlights are faster movement speed, getting a double jump, making enemies explode on death, and a ton of other ones. Plus, this version has a bunch of new items from Risk of Rain 2, which is really cool to see. Then there's the characters. Think of this as your starting loadout, or class. You start with 2 unlocked by default, but can unlock an additional 13 characters. Every character plays very different to one another, and will ultimately decide the playstyle you will have for that run. Some characters are slow and more tanky, whereas others are much weaker but have better agility. It's all about finding a character that fits your playstyle, and learning how to master it. All of them are very fun to use, and while I'm sure there's a certain meta around 1 or 2 characters, they all feel like viable options that you can succeed with. Finally, there's the artifacts. These are specific items that you need to go out of your way to find in certain locations within the levels. Once you find one, you can use it on your next run. These are gameplay modifiers that you can use to alter your experience. Some of them make the game harder, while some of them make it easier. A good comparison would be something like the skulls from Halo. Now, even though Risk of Rain is a roguelite, there is still an ending. After you successfully make it through 5 levels in a run, you'll come across a new teleporter that will give you 2 options. One option takes you back to the first level, and you can now try to make it through as many stages or loops as you can. The second option takes you to a new area, where you will be able to fight the main boss of the game, and if you succeed in defeating it, you will have successfully completed a run. Risk of Rain is a hard game. This is one of those games where I'd recommend most people start out on the lowest difficulty, and then bump it up to one of the other ones after you get your first successful run, because even this difficulty will give you a nice challenge. There's also another cool mechanic this game has. You see that bar in the top right? That measures your current run's difficulty. As the time goes on, the world will start to spawn more and more harder to defeat enemies, so you're actively encouraged to move pretty fast in this game so that you're equipped to deal with that later challenge. It's a really clever mechanic that keeps every new run interesting, because you'll always be thinking about the most efficient use of your time. Let's talk about the combat real quick. Now, this being a 2D game is a blessing and a curse in this department. It's great because the combat is very easy to understand, given you're really just holding down attack and using your other abilities when their cooldown ends, whilst trying to avoid enemy attacks. On the other hand though, the combat can get pretty awkward at times, especially when you need to attack a flying enemy. That's because you can only attack an enemy that is directly in front of you, which means that you need to either wait for a flying enemy to move in front of you, or just hope that you have an item or a piece of equipment that's able to target enemies. These moments are pretty often too, and it's when the game can start to show its age a little bit. As annoying as that can be though, it really is a minor inconvenience on what is otherwise a very great gameplay loop. The last thing I want to touch on here are these things called the Providence Trials. These are short challenges that you can do in order to unlock new items and character abilities, so you're going to want to do at least a few of these. Most of these are really fun to do, and teach you all about the different skills that a character has. But some of these are also downright annoying to do, so it's a good thing that there's so many in case you come across one that you don't want to do. Overall, they're an excellent addition to this version of Risk of Rain that provide you with even more content. And that's Risk of Rain Returns. It's an excellent release that brings an old classic to modern platforms with a bunch of additions and quality of life improvements, and if you're looking for a new game to get addicted to, I cannot recommend this one enough. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.